Hey guys, Miss Dyer here. Hope you're doing all. Hope you're all doing okay and staying healthy. This is going to be our last lecture video for this semester. I know you guys are glad to be getting finished with your classes. We are going to go over this video, um, and then you're going to have an interactive notebook over the nervous system, and then you're going to have a test on quizzes. And again, all of this will be due by Sunday, May the 3rd, at about 11:45 or so p.m. Um, please make sure that you have done the interactive notebook and looked over the PowerPoint before you do that test. You are only going to have 30 seconds for each question, so it's important that you kind of have an idea of what the unit was about before you start answering questions on that test, or else you're not going to have time to look up answers online or in your notes if you're not familiar with anything at all in 30 seconds probably. So it's a good idea to have done all the materials before you do the test over the nervous system. I'm hoping to get the final posted on Google Classroom this week. Once you finish the digestive system test on quizzes, this video, the interactive notebook for the nervous system test on quizzes, and then your final, you will be finished with anatomy, unless there's anything that you need to want to go back and redo, or maybe some of you may have some things that you need to make up. If you will go look on Infinite Campus, I have put grades in for all the work that you did up to last week. I haven't got last week's work graded yet. I plan on getting that graded maybe in the middle of this week, hopefully. And then next week, of course, I will be grading the work that you do this week. So you can get on Google Classroom and look and see if there's anything that you maybe made a low score on that you want to redo, or something that you haven't done at all. I do have notes on assignments, like if you haven't done it at all. I put like a low grade in there, but said you need to complete this assignment. So you will have, after this week, next week will be a makeup week, a catch-up makeup week, so that you will be able to go back, if you let me know. You can go back and redo some assignments now. The Google Classroom assignments you can redo. Anything on quizzes, you would have to let me know that, because I would have to open that back up and reassign it to you. So if there's anything that you're wanting to redo, either before or after you take your final, you can just email me and let me know that next week, and I will reset that for you. And again, you can see if there's anything that you need to make up or redo by looking at your grades on Infinite Campus. Again, I don't have last week's grades in yet. Hopefully I'll get those in this week. And then, of course, this week's assignments, I won't be getting graded until next week probably. So hopefully I'll get those graded pretty early in the week, so that will still give you a few days to get some stuff made up before the end of school. But anyway, as I was saying, this is our last unit. This is our last lecture video. And the test on quizzes over the nervous system will be your last unit exam. And then the only other thing you'll have left to do is the final. So once you get the final done in this class, you will be done with anatomy, unless, like I said, there's something that you want to go back and make up or redo. Again, I said I would try to get that final on by the end of this week. I'll try to get it on Google Classroom this week, so that if you would like to go ahead and do it and do all your work and be done and not have to worry about it, that's fine. I'm not going to promise that I can get that done, but I'm going to try really hard to. Okay, so let's talk about the nervous system. Now, we do have a video, a crash course video. You guys know I love this guy and I love these videos. I'm not going to show it on here, as I've said before, because YouTube will flag this video and take it down, because this video is copyrighted, so I can't play it on here. But again, I have posted the PowerPoint for you to look at on Google Classroom, so you can go to that PowerPoint, click on this slide, and it will play this video for you. Again, this video is going to do a really good job of explaining some things again that I'm going to talk about, but it also will. It's probably going to go over. It may go over 2 or 3 things that I won't talk about that you may need to answer questions on your test or your interactive notebook over this unit. Okay, so there are three basic functions of the nervous system. The first function is the sensory function. And again, you guys, this is when you use your five senses to detect stimuli in your environment, to detect temperature, touch, smells, images, sounds. So the sensory function is the ability of your nerves, your sensory receptors for all five of your senses, and your nerves to detect stimuli such as pressure, temperature changes, taste, smell, or light, and send that message in the form of impulses from your body to your brain and spinal cord. So basically, this sensory function involves messages being sent from your body to your brain as your body helps you sense your environment. Now, usually we think of the external environment, but we do have sensory receptors and nerves that actually help our body to sense our internal environment as well. If we're hungry, or someone's having chest pain, or their back is hurting due to a kidney stone, or they're having pain from appendicitis. Okay, so not only are we sensing stimuli from outside of our body, our external environment, but we're also sensing stimuli from inside of our body, our internal environment as well. So that is one function, the sensory function. Another function is the motor function. This is the ability of the brain to send impulses to muscles. That is going to include your cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle, as well as glands, to cause movement, to cause some kind of change in position or functioning of a body part or organ. So in short, the motor function is just the opposite of the sensory function. It is messages being sent from your brain to your body to respond to the stimulus that you are sensing. So for example, let's just say we touch a hot pot. Okay, the sensory function is going to be those sensory receptors in our skin, and then the nerves, the sensory neurons sending messages from our skin to our brain to tell our brain, hey, this is hot. And then the motor function is the brain sending messages back along motor neurons to our hand, to those skeletal muscles in our hand, to tell us to respond to that heat by pulling our hand away. Now, of course, it takes us several seconds to talk about that, but it happens very quickly in a fraction of a second. The third function of our nervous system is called the integration function. This is where the nervous system controls and coordinates functions throughout our body and responds to internal and external stimuli. Basically, this is our brain interpreting the messages that have been received from the sensory function in order to determine the appropriate response by our motor function. So again, we get the message from our sensory function is detecting the hot pot. Okay, well, before we make that response, our brain integrates that information. Our brain processes that information. It interprets it to determine the correct response. Because, if our brain didn't do that, then we might respond by grabbing the pot. Well, that, you think that would be stupid. But again, your brain interprets the message. This is the integrative function. So when your brain receives that message that this is a hot pot, then your brain processes that, it interprets that information, and it decides the correct response. And again, that correct response is pull your hand away. So then the brain does the motor function, which sends messages to the skeletal muscles in the hand for you to pull your hand away. Again, this happens very quickly. It takes us a long time to talk about it, but it happens in a fraction of a second. Okay, so we have now we're going to see we have a lot of different divisions of our nervous system, but the main two divisions are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is divided into two parts, your brain and spinal cord. Your peripheral nervous system includes all of the cranial nerves that branch off of your brain and the spinal nerves that branch off of your spinal cord. You have 12 pair of cranial nerves and 31 pair of spinal nerves. So the parts of the central nervous system are the brain and spinal cord. The parts of the peripheral nervous system are the 12 pair of cranial nerves and the 31 pair of spinal nerves. Now, again, those cranial nerves, or not really the cranial nerves probably, but the spinal nerves actually branch off into other nerves that extend all over our body, all the way down to the tips of our fingers and the tips of our toes. So these cranial nerves and spinal nerves can be divided into two major divisions or two major groups, and that's going to be our somatic nervous system and then our autonomic nervous system. And we're going to see that autonomic nervous system is further subdivided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So this is a good graphic organizer that you can use to help you understand all the different divisions of the nervous system. Again, there are lots of different graphic organizers. This is just one that I found online that I put on here for us to look at. But again, you can go to Google and look up graphic organizer for the nervous system, or graphic organizer of the division of the nervous system, and you can find lots of different graphic organizers. But basically, again, we see here the two main divisions: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system containing the brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system containing the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. And then we can see here there are again, the two major divisions of the peripheral nervous system is the autonomic and the somatic nervous system. And then that autonomic nervous system is further divided into the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. Now, we do here have a sensory division and motor division. That is just saying, okay, the peripheral nerves, again, those cranial and spinal nerves, some of them function as sensory nerves, some of them function as motor nerves. So these aren't really necessarily divisions of the peripheral nervous system, but again, we can group those nerves into sensory nerves and motor nerves, but we also can group these cranial and spinal nerves into autonomic nerves and somatic nerves, or at least the fibers. Some of our cranial nerves, for example, are completely sensory, like our optic nerve. And then we have other cranial nerves that are both sensory and motor, and then we have some that are specifically motor nerves. And I'm trying to think of one that would be specifically motor nerve, like a cranial nerve. I can't think of it right off the top of my head. But anyway, so we can group the cranial nerves and spinal nerves into being sensory or motor as far as their function, but we can also group them into being autonomic or somatic as far as function too. Again, somatic is referring to, these are going to be all the neurons that control your voluntary muscle. That would be your skeletal muscle. All of those neurons that innervate and stimulate your skeletal muscle would be part of the somatic nervous system. And then all of the neurons that stimulate and innervate our cardiac muscle and smooth muscle and glands, which is going to be our involuntary muscle, those would be part of the autonomic nervous system. And then, of course, our autonomic can be divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So with these autonomic nerves, some fibers in those nerves are sympathetic, other fibers are parasympathetic. Okay, so let's go ahead and then look first at the central nervous system, which remember is the brain and spinal cord. The brain contains approximately 100 billion neurons, again, so 100 billion nerve cells. It weighs about 3 pounds. It's really pretty soft and gelatinous. In a living brain, and it about 20% of the blood that leaves your heart circulates through the brain. So the brain requires an enormous blood supply. One of the reasons for this is your brain is very metabolically active, so it requires a huge amount of oxygen and glucose in order to keep those cells alive and functioning. So this is the reason why we have about 20% of our blood that circulates through through our brain each day. In fact, if your blood sugar level gets too low, your brain cells do not have enough energy to keep functioning. Your brain will actually shut down, and that's what a diabetic coma is. When someone's blood sugar level gets too low, the brain just shuts down. They go into a diabetic coma and they die from it because, again, the brain cannot function if it's not getting that huge supply of oxygen and glucose. Again, our brain, is considered the control center of our body. It's responsible for analyzing information, processing information, and relaying messages to the rest of the body. It, along with our spinal cord, forms the central nervous system, as we said earlier. The spinal cord is the other part of the central nervous system. It is the major communication link between the brain and the rest of the body. So the spinal cord is what connects our brain to the rest of our body. Our brain is responsible for many reflexes, but our spinal cord can also process many reflexes. And remember, a reflex is an automatic, involuntary, unconscious response to a stimulus. So a lot of the reflexes, the center for those reflexes, let's say, for example, like vomiting and swallowing and hiccuping, those are reflexes. Once you start those, you can't stop those. They just happen automatically without you even thinking about it. Okay, the centers for those are in our brain. However, we do have other reflexes where the centers are in our spinal cord. We actually have some reflexes that the information for that reflex to happen never even goes to the brain. It just is processed and it happens from the spinal cord. So that I thought that was kind of neat, and that's something if you take dual credit anatomy next year, you'll learn more about. As I said earlier, there are 12 pair of cranial nerves. There are 31 pair of spinal nerves that branch from the spinal cord. And many of these control processes such as breathing and movement of our skeletal muscles. Again, some of them are somatic, controlling our skeletal muscle, and then others are involuntary or autonomic, controlling, involuntary muscle like cardiac and smooth muscle as well as our glands. Again, our somatic nervous system consists of all the peripheral nerves that send sensory information to the brain and spinal cord, and then motor nerve fibers that send that information from the brain back to, again, our skeletal muscle. Again, our somatic nervous system is telling our skeletal muscle, our voluntary muscle, what to do. And then that autonomic nervous system, again, is divided into two major parts, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. There's also another division called the enteric nervous system. We'll look at it a little bit, but we won't talk a lot about it. We're going to talk a lot more about the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Again, remember that the autonomic nerves are going to control the involuntary muscles. That's going to be your cardiac and smooth muscle that is found in your internal organs or your viscera, such as your heart and your intestines, and also controlling the glands as well. Many glands like your pancreas, also sweat glands, different glands like that. Okay, here's another video that's going to talk about different parts of the brain. It's a very short, very simple video that goes over the four major parts of the brain. That's going to be your cerebrum, which is here, your cerebellum, which is here, your medulla oblongata, which is here, and then the diencephalon, which is up in here, kind of in the core of the brain. So that video will talk about those four parts. Again, this is probably a copyrighted video, so I'm not going to show it on here, but you might want to go watch it because it will give you, if nothing else, a review over some of the things that we're going to talk about in this video. Again, the four major parts of the brain, as I said, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon, which includes parts of the limbic system that we'll talk about later. Each of these, actually not three, but four parts, has different regions with different functions. We're going to look at the cerebrum first. The cerebrum, or the cerebral cortex, is the largest part of your brain, and it is associated with higher brain functions such as thoughts and actions and planning and problem solving. Again, our cerebrum gives us those higher mental functions that separate humans from all other animals. All mammals, for example, have a cerebrum, but the human cerebrum is the largest, most highly developed cerebrum, and that gives us the ability to do things that other animals can't do, like talk and make plans and problem solve, those higher mental functions that separate us from all other animals. This cerebrum or cerebral cortex is divided into four sections that we call lobes, and I hope these names sound familiar to you because these are the same names as the names of the bones on the skull. So the frontal lobe there is behind the frontal bone around the forehead. The parietal lobe is under the parietal bones, kind of there on the top of your head. The occipital lobe is behind that occipital bone there on the back of your head. And then the temporal lobes are behind the temporal bones there on the side of your head around your ears. And they're labeled here as well. Frontal, here at the front where your forehead is. Parietal, kind of here on the top. Occipital in the back. And then temporal here on the sides. Again, the cerebral cortex is highly wrinkled. This wrinkling just increases the surface area of the brain so that it can hold more neurons, and this makes the brain more efficient and able to process more information. Specifically, that it makes its cerebrum more efficient. So, looking at those four lobes again, as you can see here, the four lobes. We want to know, what do those four lobes do? Well, the frontal lobe is going to be the one that's associated with a lot of the higher mental functions that I was talking about, the reasoning, the planning, the problem solving. Also, we have centers in our frontal lobe for emotions and personality, which I think is really interesting. If you've ever heard of someone having a brain injury, a traumatic brain injury, and their personality changes, you guys, they're not putting on. It really happens. Probably someone who had a brain injury and it really changed their personality, they probably had damage to that frontal lobe. I don't know if I ever told you guys, Miss Emberton had a student teacher several years ago, and we sat one day during planning and talked, and she talked about how when she had been in high school, she had been wild, that she had, didn't care to take risks. She took risks all the time. She did things she wasn't supposed to do. She said she was just really wild and loved to party. And she was sitting here telling us this. She said then she had a really, really bad car accident and had a brain injury. She said once she recovered from that, she said, I'm not the same person anymore. She said, I can tell you that right now. She said, I'm calm. I don't like to take risks. She's like the total opposite of what she was before the car accident when she had that brain injury. So again, your frontal lobe has controls your personality, and if you damage that frontal lobe, then it can definitely change the kind of person. I have heard of examples like that student teacher, where someone went from being really aggressive or really wild to being calm and more laid back. I've also seen examples of just the opposite, where someone who was a nice, friendly, outgoing person turned into this really aggressive, mean person. So it can happen both ways. Also, we have our olfactory bulb. On the underside, or the inferior portion of the frontal lobe, right above your nose, you have the olfactory bulb, which is responsible for smell. So just remember that olfactory means smell. That'll be important to us again later on when we talk about the cranial nerves. The parietal lobe is associated with centers for movement, as well as perceiving many stimuli, such as taste, touch, temperature, and pain. We are going to see that we have the olfactory bulb for smell in our frontal lobe. The parietal lobe is going to be a lot about touch, like touch and feeling sensations. The occipital lobe has our visual center, so this is where our stimuli for our eyes are processed. And then our temporal lobe, in addition to having centers for speech and memory, also has our auditory center, which is where information from our sense of hearing is processed. So you can see we have different lobes of our cerebrum that process all 5 of our senses. Again, smell processed in our frontal lobe, touch processed in our parietal lobe, and taste as well, vision processed in our occipital lobe, and then hearing processed in our temporal lobe. So all 4 lobes, each one of those 4 lobes is responsible. It has centers that help to interpret and process information that comes in from your 5 senses. Another interesting thing about the cerebrum is just the anatomy of it. It has a deep furrow here in the center. Again, this is a superior view, so we're looking at the top of the brain, the top of the head here. This is called the longitudinal cerebral fissure. This is a deep furrow that separates the cerebrum into 2 halves, and you can see here's one half, here's the other half. These halves are known as hemispheres. So we have a left hemisphere and we have a right hemisphere. These 2 hemispheres look almost identical. They look completely symmetrical, but scientists, doctors have determined that each side of your cerebrum functions a little bit differently than the other side. The right hemisphere is associated with creativity, spatial abilities, face recognition, visual imagery, and music. Okay, so more your creative in abilities, whereas the left hemisphere is associated with language, math, and logic abilities. So if you're more of a logical, mathematical, you like science and math type of person, then you're more, your left hemisphere is more dominant. If you are someone who likes creativity, art, music, drama, then your right hemisphere is more dominant. So if you've ever heard of people being left-brained and right-brained, this is what they're talking about. Left-brained people like math and science. They're more logical. Right-brain people are more creative. They like the music and the arts. We actually have inside of our brain something called the corpus callosum, which is a bundle of nerves that connects these 2 hemispheres together. So, you do have some information that crosses this corpus callosum from one hemisphere to the other. But again, overall, these are the abilities that each hemisphere gives us. We also have nerve cells that make up the gray matter of the cerebrum. The white matter is underneath the gray matter, and it contains nerve cells that carry electrical signals. The white matter is called white because it has more myelin than the gray matter. The myelin makes the white matter appear lighter, more white in color, and it actually conducts those action potentials, those electrical signals, faster. The gray matter does also have some myelin, but not nearly as much, so it looks darker and more gray, and it doesn't carry electrical signals as quickly as the white matter does. Again, you're going to have gray matter more on the outside of the brain and white matter more on the inside of the brain. You will have some gray matter very deep within the brain as well, but you basically have gray on the outside with white underneath. And then our spinal cord is just the opposite. Our spinal cord has white matter on the outside with gray matter in the shape of a butterfly on the inside. Okay, in the cerebrum, we have the neocortex. The neocortex, again, is, the outer, probably 2/3 of the cerebrum. And it is a 6-layered structure that is found only in mammals. And it is this neocortex that is associated with our higher mental functions, and it is more highly evolved in mammals such as humans and primates and dolphins. And so again, this gives mammals, a higher mental functioning than lower animals. But again, still humans have the most developed neocortex of any animal, which gives us abilities that even the dolphins and primates don't have, like speaking and planning and things like that. Okay, moving on then to the cerebellum, which is going to be here kind of posterior and inferior to the cerebrum. The cerebellum literally means little brain, and it is similar to the cerebrum in that it does have two hemispheres and it has a highly folded surface. So it's folded, it looks a lot like the cerebrum, just a lot smaller. The function of the cerebellum is to coordinate your skeletal muscle movement as well as posture and balance. You guys, when someone drinks, that alcohol affects their cerebellum. This is the reason why they can't walk a straight line, that they're all tipsy and falling down and everything, because alcohol affects the cerebellum. And so therefore, if it's affecting the cerebellum, it's affecting their coordination of their muscle movement, is affecting their posture and their balance, and that's why they can't stand up, they can't walk a straight line and things like that. The cerebellum is also assumed to be much older than the cerebrum evolutionarily, and what this means is that animals that scientists assume to have evolved prior to humans, for example, reptiles do have cerebellums. However, reptiles do not have a cerebrum. So again, animals that are considered to be not as evolutionarily evolved, like that came first, like are older than humans, such as reptiles, they do have a cerebellum, but reptiles don't have a cerebrum. So only your more highly developed, your more recently evolved animals have a cerebrum. So it is thought that the cerebrum is the youngest part of the brain, because only the most highly developed animals have that. Older animals that are thought to be evolutionarily older, they don't have a cerebrum, but they do have a cerebellum. So therefore, that tells us that, hey, the cerebellum probably came before the cerebrum, evolutionarily speaking. Okay, again, so here's our cerebrum. This is our cerebrum. This is the largest part of the brain. This is our cerebellum. Again, we're going to see the diencephalon is in here, and then this is going to be our brainstem. So moving on to the brainstem, this is the brainstem is a structure that is responsible for your vital life processes. So your brainstem is what is keeping you alive, guys. You have centers in your brainstem that are going to help regulate breathing, your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your heart rate, all different things like that. If you have damage to your brainstem, you probably are not going to live. You generally cannot survive damage to the brainstem because the centers in the brainstem control your basic functioning of your body that keeps you alive. Scientists say that the brainstem is the simplest part of the brain because basically animals that don't have any other part of the brain have a brainstem. Animals such as reptiles do have a brainstem that resembles ours. So it is believed that the brainstem was the very first part of the brain to develop. So the animals that have no other part of the brain but a brainstem, they do have a brainstem but nothing else. So that's going to be very simple, very unevolved animals. So therefore, it's believed that the brainstem is the oldest part of the brain. It developed first, and then later on, evolutionarily speaking, the cerebellum developed, and then lastly, the cerebrum developed. The brainstem has three major parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. I know you guys have heard of the medulla oblongata before. The midbrain has centers that are involved in vision and speech, as well as eye and body movement. So you don't have a lot of vital life processes going on here. You do have some reflexes in your midbrain that allow you to, like when you hear a loud noise, you turn your head, you turn your head toward that sound. Again, that is, when you look, and that is a survival function. So this does have some survival functions, but not necessarily like vital life processes like your breathing and heart rate and things like that. But it does help you I mean, evolutionarily speaking, if you're talking about animals, when you hear a loud noise, you turn your head and look at the direction that loud noise came from, because that could help you detect danger and get away from that danger. So again, it does have a survival function, but not necessarily, vital life processes that are keeping your body alive. The pons is the midbrain is going to be the most superior part of the brainstem. The pons is going to be in the middle between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. It is a small bulge in between those two parts, and it is involved. It has centers that help to regulate our rate and depth of breathing. So the pons is involved in regulating our breathing. And then the medulla oblongata is the most inferior portion of the brainstem. The spinal cord is connected to the medulla oblongata, and it is going to have centers in it that help to regulate our heartbeat, the cardiac center, helping to regulate our blood pressure. Also, you have centers in there helping to regulate our breathing, as well as reflexes such as swallowing, hiccuping, and vomiting. So you have, all of those swallowing, hiccuping, and vomiting, those are reflexes. Once they start, you can't really stop them. They're unconscious. You don't have conscious control over them. They are reflexes, and centers for those things are in the medulla oblongata, again, along with centers for some basic life processes such as your heart rate and your breathing. Okay, so again, here's your midbrain, the most superior portion of the brainstem, the pons below that, and the medulla oblongata below that, and then right below the medulla oblongata would be your spinal cord. Again, here is your cerebellum. Here's your cerebrum. And you guys, something right here that we see, this is the corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum here, which remember we said is the bridge of nerves that is connecting the left and right hemispheres of this cerebrum. Okay, now we're going to look at the diencephalon, also including parts of the limbic system. The thalamus is very important in that all sensory information is filtered through the thalamus except for the sense of smell. Okay, the sense of smell goes directly from your nose to those olfactory bulbs on the inferior portion of your frontal lobe of your cerebrum. But all other senses, information from your ears, information from your eyes, information from your tongue, and information from your skin. Before that information goes to the occipital lobe or the temporal lobe or the parietal lobe, that information first goes through the thalamus. And the thalamus, we say that the thalamus is the relay station for all sensory information except for the sense of smell. Again, what the thalamus is doing, you guys, if you sit and think about it, you have all kinds of information coming in, all kinds of sensory information coming in. Maybe you're sitting here right now listening to this video, looking at the screen, but maybe you can hear your heat kicking off and on, or your air kicking off or on. Maybe there's music or the television playing in the background. Maybe the ceiling fan is running. Maybe you have a pet that's barking outside. Maybe your stomach is growling. So you have tons of information coming into your body, going to your brain all the time. All of this information is filtered through your thalamus. Your thalamus helps to filter that information, meaning that it kind of helps to filter out things that maybe aren't really important to allow you to focus on the things that are important. So maybe your ceiling fan is running, maybe you hear your air kicking off or on, maybe your stomach is growling, maybe you feel hungry right now, but your thalamus is helping to filter all of that out so that you can pay attention to what I'm saying and what is on the screen. So again, it's your thalamus that filters that sensory information to allow you to pay attention to the most important sensory information coming in while kind of putting everything else in the background. The hypothalamus is another important part of the diencephalon. It is involved in homeostasis, guys. We say that the hypothalamus is the homeostatic center of your brain, and how that your hypothalamus helps to maintain homeostasis is that your hypothalamus actually stimulates your pituitary gland. It controls the pituitary gland. I think specifically you have an anterior and posterior pituitary, and the hypothalamus stimulates the posterior pituitary to release hormones. And then that posterior pituitary will release those hormones, which will then go to other endocrine glands in your body and cause those glands to release hormones. So by controlling or stimulating the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus is able to control and stimulate all the other endocrine glands in your body to release hormones that are going to help to regulate things like calcium levels. Remember the calcitonin and the parathyroid hormone? Okay, the hypothalamus helps to stimulate the thyroid and the parathyroids to release those glands by stimulating the pituitary gland. Remember insulin and glucagon being released by the pancreas? Well, the hypothalamus helps to stimulate the release of those hormones by stimulating the pituitary gland to release hormones that go to your pancreas and stimulate your pancreas to release insulin or glucagon. So by controlling or stimulating the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus is able to regulate the functioning, the secretion of hormones by all the other endocrine glands in your body. And that is how your hypothalamus helps to maintain homeostasis in your body. Not just your blood sugar levels and your calcium levels, but also reproductive hormones, also the body temperature, which is another homeostasis, staying around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, the hypothalamus helps your body to maintain homeostasis by stimulating the pituitary gland to release hormones that will then go to endocrine glands and tell those endocrine glands to release hormones and which hormones to release. So we say that the hypothalamus is the connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. And again, that hypothalamus is able to maintain homeostasis of your body by being that connection to your endocrine system. You also have centers in your hypothalamus that are involved in emotion, as well, again, thirst, hunger, and circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms, again, guys, are going to be things like your sleep-wake cycle. Also going to be things like, again, your home, like a female's menstrual cycle, but because females cycle through different levels of hormones each month, and that's what causes them to have their menstrual cycle. So when we say the hypothalamus is responsible for homeostasis, again, homeostasis is involved, thirst and hunger is involved in homeostasis, circadian rhythms, that's going to be your sleep-wake cycle, your reproductive cycles, your fertility cycles. Again, all of those are involved in hormones and homeostasis. The hypothalamus also helps to control the autonomic nervous system. Another part of the diencephalon, the amygdala, it is located in the temporal lobe of your cerebrum. Again, it's kind of there in the center of the brain, kind of in that inferior medial portion of that temporal lobe. And the main thing that I remember about the amygdala is that it is responsible for us having emotions such as fear and anger and pleasure and other motivations that are related to survival. So again, emotions that are related to like addictive behaviors might come in here as well. Motivations, you eat something and it makes you feel good, so you keep eating it, or you do something and it makes you feel good, so you keep doing it. That kind of addictive behavior. And then the last part we want to talk about with the diencephalon is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is important in learning and memory. Mainly, it converts short-term memory to long-term memory. And it's also important for recalling spatial relationships in the world about us. Whenever someone has Alzheimer's, this is the first part of the brain that is affected, is the hippocampus. This is the reason why someone with Alzheimer's, they may be able to remember something that happened 30 years ago, but they can't remember something that happened yesterday. Because 30 years ago, they didn't have Alzheimer's. Their hippocampus was working. So whatever happened got converted to long-term memory. But yesterday, now they have Alzheimer's, their hippocampus isn't working correctly. So things that happened yesterday, they forget them because they didn't get converted to long-term memory because the hippocampus isn't working. Now, eventually, Alzheimer's will affect other portions of the brain as well and eventually lead to death. But at least in the beginning, the hippocampus is going to be one of the first parts of the brain that are affected. And so they have problems converting short-term memory to long-term memory. And this is why they start forgetting things. But then as it progresses, it gets worse. Okay, so again, here's our cerebrum, here's our corpus callosum, here's our cerebellum, here's our brainstem with our midbrain, our pons, and our medulla oblongata. This is our diencephalon. Specifically, this is our thalamus, this is our hypothalamus, and this is our pituitary gland. Again, thalamus is here in the center, the relay station for all sensory information except the sense of smell. Here's our hypothalamus, the major connection between our nervous system and our endocrine system. It is our homeostatic center of our brain. And then connected to our hypothalamus here is the pituitary gland that releases a lot of hormones that then go to other endocrine glands and cause them to release more hormones. Okay, we also want to talk about coverings of our brain and spinal cord. These are called the meninges. There are 3 layers of connective tissue that enclose the brain and spinal cord. They are located under the skull, and they are attached directly to the brain and spinal cord. These meninges, these coverings, along with the bones of the skull and the vertebral column, help to provide protection to our brain and spinal cord. From deep to superficial, so again, from deep to superficial, the layers are PAD, P-A-D, the pia mater, the arachnoid matter, and the dura mater. We also know that cerebrospinal fluid circulates between the layers of the meninges. It also circulates within the brain and spinal cord. The cerebrospinal fluid is helping to kind of cleanse and wash the brain and spinal cord, as well as provide some nutrients. But mainly with these meninges, the cerebrospinal fluid is helping to protect the brain and spinal cord by cushioning it. If you think of the fluid in the serous membranes as kind of like a water balloon, it's kind of the same thing here. This cerebrospinal fluid in these layers of connective tissue, these meninges, kind of is like a bouncy, smushy water balloon, helping to provide cushioning to prevent our brain and spinal cord from jarring up against our brain when we stop real quickly or get hit in the head or something like that. Okay, so the dura mater is the most superior layer of the, again, PAD, pia mater, arachnoid mater, dura mater is from superficial to deep. So what we're doing here is it's from deep to superficial. What we're doing here is talking about them from superficial to deep. So the outermost layer directly under the skull is going to be the dura mater. It is the most superior of the meningeal layers, and its name, dura mater, literally means hard mother in Latin. And it's called this because it is very tough and inflexible. And its main function is to protect the brain from being, again, displaced, from being knocked into your skull or something whenever you stop real suddenly. The space between the dura mater and the skull is called the epidural space. Again, you've heard of an epidural before. Someone who has an epidural, let's say when they're having a baby, well, that anesthesia is injected into the epidural space between the dura mater and the skull. Also, if there is hemorrhaging in the brain, blood can collect in the epidural space. And if an adult has a closed head injury, then in an adult, the blood is more likely to pool in this epidural space. We also have a space, so this epidural space, epi is outside or outer, so it is above the dura mater, between the skull and the dura mater. Okay, we also have another space between that is below the dura mater. It's between the dura mater and the next layer of the meninges, which is called the arachnoid mater. And so this is called the subdural space because it's below the dura mater. So epi is outside or above the dura mater. The subdural space is below the dura mater. It's between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater. When children have head injuries, they are more likely to have bleeding and blood pooling in the subdural space. And I don't know the reason for the difference, but that is a difference. Again, if blood collects here, then it actually builds up pressure on the brain and can actually cause brain damage as a result. Okay, so the middle layer, the second layer of the spinal meninges is called the arachnoid mater. And it provides cushioning and protection for your brain and spinal cord. Again, I'm talking about these being around the brain, but guys, they are around the brain and spinal cord both. They're continuous around the brain and spinal cord. Again, the cerebrospinal fluid in this layer helps to cushion and protect the brain. So the dura mater is tough, protecting the brain from displacement. The arachnoid mater with the cerebrospinal fluid is cushioning to protect the brain and spinal cord from hard knocks. The last space that we have is the space between the arachnoid mater and the innermost layer, which is the pia mater. This is called the subarachnoid space, and it is filled with cerebrospinal fluid, again, creating that cushion that's helping to protect the brain and spinal cord. Arachnoid, the reason this is called the arachnoid mater is because the blood vessels in this subarachnoid space kind of give this arachnoid mater kind of almost a spider web-like appearance. So that's why it's called the arachnoid mater. The third and deepest layer of the spinal meninges is called the pia mater. And the main, first of all, it is attached directly to the brain and spinal cord very firmly. And the main function of this layer of spinal meninges is that it contains blood vessels and capillaries that are responsible for nourishing the brain and spinal cord. So your dura and your arachnoid maters are more about protection, whereas your pia mater is all about nourishing. The blood vessels in this layer are carrying the oxygen and nutrients to the cells of the brain and spinal cord to keep them alive. Okay, let's talk a little bit about cerebrospinal fluid. It is a clear watery fluid that bathes the brain and spinal cord. and helps to cushion it and protect them by acting as a shock absorber. It also brings nutrients from the blood to the brain, and it also removes waste from the brain and spinal cord into the bloodstream to be carried away to the kidneys. Again, as we already said, the CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid, again, CSF just stands for cerebrospinal fluid. It circulates between the two layers of the meninges through the center of the spinal cord. There's actually a hollow opening in the center of the spinal cord called the central canal. And it also circulates through 4 hollow spaces in the brain called ventricles. And it is actually produced by special cells in the ventricles of the brain. The layer that produces this cerebrospinal fluid in the ventricles of the brain is called the choroid plexus, and the cells are ependymal cells. And you'll learn a lot. You don't have to know that right now. You'll learn a lot more about it if you take dual credit anatomy next year. Again, let's talk a little bit about the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the most important structure between your body and your brain. It is the link that connects your entire body to your brain. So it carries messages from the body to the brain and from the brain back down to the body. Again, it is composed, we talked about this earlier, gray matter on the inside in the shape of a butterfly, and then white matter on the outside of that. The spinal cord is divided into 4 different regions, very similar to your vertebral column, which we already learned about. Remember, our vertebral column is the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccyx regions, and those numbers were 7, 12, 5, 5, 4. Well, the spinal cord itself doesn't correspond exactly to those numbers and those regions, but very similar to those numbers and regions of the vertebral column. The 4 regions that the spinal cord is divided into are the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. You do have one coccygeal nerve, so you do have some coccyx-like in there, but mainly you have the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral regions. You can visually distinguish them from one another, and there are actually 2 enlargements on the spinal cord. The cervical enlargement is there around the end of the C. The cervical, the C means cervical, T is thoracic. It's around the end of the cervical region, the beginning of the thoracic region, and this is an enlargement that gives off nerves to your arms. And then we also have a lumbar enlargement from the lumbar region to the sacral region that gives off nerves to the legs. And you can actually see those enlargements when you look at a picture of the spinal cord, which I don't know if I have a picture of it on here or not. Again, there are 31 segments. Each segment has a pair of spinal nerves exiting from it, giving us 31 pair of spinal nerves. There are 8 cervical nerves, 12 thoracic nerves, 5 lumbar nerves, 5 sacral nerves, and 1 coccygeal nerve. So again, remember our vertebral column, it was 7, 12, 5, 5, 4, 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 4 coccyx. Okay, well, obviously, our spinal cord doesn't correspond exactly, but very closely. Again, we don't have 4 coccygeal nerves because the spinal cord actually ends before the vertebral column. The spinal cord does not go all the way down to the end of the vertebral column, so therefore you don't have 4 coccygeal nerves, you have only 1 coccygeal nerve. And we also have 8 cervical nerves rather than just 7. Okay, so this is a cross section of our spinal cord. You'll see this quite a bit in your dual credit anatomy next year if you take that. But again, here's that gray matter on the inside in the shape of a butterfly. There's that central canal that the cerebrospinal fluid circulates through. Here is the white matter on the outside of the butterfly, and then we have these are spinal nerves branching off. This is a segment, a cross section of a segment of the spinal cord, and these are spinal nerves branching off. We actually have what we call an anterior root of a spinal nerve, a posterior root of the spinal nerve, and then where that anterior and posterior root come together, this is the actual spinal nerve. And then it's the same thing on this side. You have the posterior root, the anterior root, and then the spinal nerve where those two come together. Okay, here I do have a picture of the spinal cord itself. Again, the red is the spinal cord. As you can see here, the purple here are the the cervical nerves. The cervical nerves branching off of the cervical segments of the spinal cord. Again, we're only seeing maybe 3 of those here, but there are 8 of them. And then remember, we have 12 thoracic nerves. Those are in the green. We have 5 lumbar nerves. We have 5 sacral nerves and 1 coccygeal. It looks like here we may not be seeing, because this picture is cut off a little bit, we can see all the way down to S3, that's the 3rd sacral nerve, but under that you can see there's 2 more right here. And then, of course, we're not seeing that coccygeal nerve in this picture because part of it is broken off. Again, up here around this area is that cervical enlargement that's branching off nerves to the arms, and then right around in here somewhere we're going to have the lumbar enlargement that's branching off nerves to the legs. Okay, going back at something that we've looked at least twice already in this class. Of course, it's appropriate to talk about it in this unit because we are talking about the nervous system, which is the system that contains all the neurons. Okay, remember the neuron is it's a nerve cell. It's the basic building block of the nervous system. Again, remember they are very highly specialized cells that their main function is to conduct electrical signals throughout the body. But remember that those electrical signals also take a chemical form when the electricity gets to the end of the neuron. So again, here is the cell body, which is the where all the normal cell activities of this nerve cell are taking place. Here is the nucleus, that is the control center of this nerve cell. So again, this part of the nerve cell is just like any other cell. It's going to have mitochondria, it's going to have endoplasmic reticulum, it's going to have all those things that normal cells have that to do all the jobs that they need to keep them alive, doing normal cell things, even with the nucleus, which is the control center of this cell, just like it is with any cell. Branching off of this cell body, we have multiple dendrites. Remember, these dendrites are the receivers. They receive the chemical signal called a neurotransmitter. Remember, this is the axon. It is the actual wire of the neuron conducting the electricity from the cell body to the axon terminals. Remember, these red things here are Schwann cells producing what we call the myelin sheath. Remember, the myelin sheath is a layer of fatty material that serves as an insulation that keeps the electrical signal on the axon and helps the electrical signal to be conducted faster down that axon. At the end of this neuron, we have these axon terminals. These are the transmitters. They release the chemical signal. They release the neurotransmitter. So basically, we have a neurotransmitter that will attach to the dendrites. This will cause an electrical signal in the nerve cell. This electricity will run down the axon. When it gets to the end here, remember there's a gap between this nerve cell and the next nerve cell. So that electricity cannot cross that gap called the synaptic cleft. And so these axon terminals will release a neurotransmitter that will diffuse across that synaptic cleft and attach to the dendrites of the next neuron, generating another electrical signal in that neuron and continuing the message on to the next cell and then the next one and so on and so forth. Again, just like we have 3 functions of our nervous system, we kind of have 3 types of neurons that kind of sort of correspond to those 3 functions. We have sensory neurons, which are called afferent neurons, that are our cells that sense the changes in the environment and carry those messages from the brain, from the body to the brain and spinal cord. So again, they carry messages from our 5 senses from the body to the brain about our external and internal environment. Then we have interneurons. Interneurons are located mainly in our brain and spinal cord. These are neurons that connect the sensory and motor neurons together. So a sensory neuron will conduct the sensory stimuli, the action potentials from that up to the brain and spinal cord to interneurons. Okay, interneurons in the brain and spinal cord, this is where the integration will happen. This is where the interpretation will happen, the processing will happen, and then from the interneuron, it will come back down a motor neuron. A motor neuron allows us to respond to our environment by carrying information from the brain and spinal cord to the muscles. Again, the somatic neurons carry information to the skeletal, voluntary muscles. The autonomic neurons carry information from our brain and spinal cord to our involuntary muscles and glands, including skeletal and cardiac muscle. Now we want to talk a little bit about those cranial nerves. Remember, cranial nerves are part of our peripheral nervous system. There are 12 pair of cranial nerves. They basically branch off the inferior portion of the brain, and they are numbered anterior to posterior. So from the front of the brain to the back, they are numbered with Roman numerals 1 through 12. So if we look at those, I have all 12 of them listed here, whether they are sensory or motor or both, as well as what they do specifically. The olfactory nerve basically is going to be those olfactory bulbs. It is strictly a sensory nerve that is responsible for your sense of smell. The optic nerve is the second one. cranial nerve number 2, again, Roman numeral 2. It is also strictly a sensory nerve that is responsible for our sense of vision. The third pair of cranial nerves are called the oculomotor nerves. These are strictly motor nerves. They are responsible for the movement of our eyeballs and our eyelids. Basically, this nerve innervates 4 of the 6 muscles that control our eyeballs. The trochlear nerve is also motor. It innervates 1 of our muscles, of our 6 muscles that control our eyeballs. Specifically, it innervates the superior oblique, which allows us to look downward. The trigeminal nerve is a mixed nerve, meaning that it has both sensory and motor functions. Sensory is it allows us to feel touch and pain on our face and in our mouth. And motor, it controls muscles that are involved in chewing. So, again, it is both motor and sensory, so we call it a mixed, or we say it is both motor and sensory nerve. Again, motor controlling the muscles, some of the muscles that are involved in chewing. As a sensory nerve, it is controlling us feeling touch and pain on our face and our mouth. And you guys, you know when you go to the dentist and you get a shot and it numbs your mouth so the dentist can give you a feeling or, work on your mouth? Well, again, trigeminal means it actually branches into 3 different branches. So when the dentist gives you those shots, he or she is numbing some of the branches of this trigeminal nerve. And so that's why it numbs you and you can't feel pain or touch whenever they're working on your mouth, because they are numbing portions of this trigeminal nerve, which is responsible for allowing you to feel touch and pain in on your face and in your mouth. The abducens nerve is strictly a motor nerve. It controls the 6th muscle that controls our movement of our eyes. Specifically, it allows us to move our eyes from side to side. We call that eye abduction, when you move your eyes from one side to the other. Cranial nerve number 7, the facial nerve, is a mixed nerve, which means it is both sensory and motor, and it allows you to make facial expressions. So it controls the muscles that allow you to make facial expressions like smiling and frowning and different things like that. It also is involved in secretion of tears and saliva. Again, that is kind of a sympathetic, parasympathetic, autonomic function. And then as a sensory nerve, it is involved in your sense of taste. I think it allows you to sense like the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. Taste from the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. The vestibulocochlear nerve is cranial nerve number 8. It is also called the auditory nerve. We're going to be calling it auditory more than we will vestibulocochlear. It is a sensory nerve strictly. It allows us to hear, so it is involved in our sense of hearing as well as our sense of balance, so equilibrium. Our glossopharyngeal nerve is cranial nerve number 9. It is a mixed nerve. It is involved in our sense of taste. It actually innervates, I think, the posterior 1/3 of our tongue. And it is also involved in sensing your carotid blood pressure. I'm not sure exactly what motor function it has. Probably something to do with your tongue movement. Again, because glosso means tongue. It's also involved in swallowing, I think, because pharyngeal, remember, that's your pharynx, your throat. So it also probably helps to innervate some of those muscles that are involved in swallowing. The vagus nerve is also a mixed nerve. It helps to sense your aortic blood pressure. It also helps you with your sense of taste. Something that's also, it is also involved with, it has a parasympathetic autonomic nervous system function. It helps to slow your heart rate and stimulate your digestive organs to function. So again, it has, we're going to see that our parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for slowing our heart rate and stimulating our digestive organs to digest our food. So this vagus nerve is really neat because not only does it, it is involved with innervating things like your tongue for tasting and things around your head and face, but it's also actually extends all the way down to your heart and your digestive organs as well, so it's kind of cool. Okay, the spinal accessory nerve is cranial nerve number 11, also called just the accessory nerve. It is strictly a motor nerve. Not only is it involved in the innervating muscles that help you to swallow, but it also controls the trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. So this is the nerve that allows you to elevate your shoulders when you shrug your shoulders. And then lastly, the hypoglossal nerve is cranial nerve number 12. Actually, there's a pair of them. There's one branching of each one of these off of each side of the brain. And it is a motor nerve that also helps to control your tongue movements. So normally we would have to be able to list these nerves as well as whether they're sensory, motor, or both. without looking at anything. And so we actually have mnemonic devices that help us to do that. Again, here is a picture. If you need to see those, you can also look a picture of the cranial nerves up online as well. But again, the olfactory nerve, this is right here. Again, remember, this is the anterior front of the brain. This is the back of the brain where the brainstem and spinal cord are attached. So again, up here is the frontal lobe. On the inferior of the frontal lobe, we're looking at an inferior view of the brain. So this is the bottom of the brain. On the inferior side of the frontal lobe, we have the olfactory nerves. Again, that's smell. These are the optic nerves here. Those are responsible for vision. Then we have our oculomotor, controlling 4 of the 6 muscles that move our eyes. We have our trochlear, controlling that superior oblique that allows us to look down. We have our trigeminal here. You can see it kind of looks like it has 3 fingers for tri. Again, those are branches. Remember that this is the nerve that dentists numb. So it helps you to feel your face and pain and touch on your face. Then we have our auditory nerves here. Again, that is also called the vestibulocochlear, or no, that's not auditory. This was our oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal. We have our abducens. This is our abducens, remember, controlling the eye muscle that allows us to abduct our eyes, which means to look from side to side. This is our facial nerve, allowing us to make facial expressions. This is our auditory nerve, also called the vestibulocochlear nerve, involved in hearing and balance. This is our glossopharyngeal nerve that's involved in taste as well as swallowing and moving our tongue. This is our vagus nerve, involved in taste as well as also innervating our heart and digestive organs, causing our heart rate to slow down and our digestive organs to digest our food. This is our spinal accessory nerve, again, helping to innervate our trapezius and sternocleidomastoid, helping us to shrug, elevate our shoulders when we shrug our shoulders. And then the hypoglossal nerve here, also involved in tongue movement. So you can see, again, pretty much they go from the anterior portion of the brain to the posterior portion, except for the spinal and the hypoglossal are kind of reversed. It looks like the spinal is the most posterior one. Even though in our list we have it being the next to the last posterior one. So why do I have them in this order? Well, number one, I have them in this order because this is basically the order that they occur, except for these last 2 on the underside of the brain. But also we have a mnemonic device that helps us to remember them in this order. And that is: on old Olympic towering tops, a Finn and German viewed some hops. So on for olfactory, old for optic, Olympus for oculomotor, T for trochlear, T for trigeminal, A for abducens, F for facial, A for auditory, again that's your vestibulocochlear, G for glossopharyngeal, V for vagus, S for spinal accessory, and H for hypoglossal. So again, if you can remember this mnemonic device, then you know the order of these cranial nerves from front to back on your brain. Again, you do have to remember the order olfactory, optic, oculomotor, because there are 3 O's. So you have to remember them in that order. You also have to remember trochlear comes before trigeminal. You also have to remember abducens comes before auditory. But other than that, that gives you the order of them on the underside of the brain. The other thing that we have to that I always have students to remember is whether they are sensory or motor or both. So our mnemonic device to help us remember that is: some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter most. Or sometimes you may hear it: some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter more. In any case, the S's are strictly sensory nerves. Again, in this order, the same order as they are on the underside of the brain, which is this order. The S's means they are strictly sensory nerves. The M's mean they are strictly motor nerves. And then the B's mean they are both sensory and motor. And then we have a really kind of funny but really catchy little song here that you can use to help you remember the different cranial nerves and what they do, as well as the sensory motor in both. It actually has these mnemonic devices that I gave you here in the video, but it also goes a lot more over the actual functions. In this class, this is the main thing that I ask you to know, but in our dual credit anatomy class, you will have to know not only the names and the Roman numerals, but you also have to know whether they're sensory, motor, or both, and you have to know specifically what the function of each one is. So again, a little bit more that you have to know. So learning this right now is going to help you tremendously in our dual credit anatomy class. Again, watch this video. In dual credit anatomy, we watch it several times to help us really remember the functions of all these different cranial nerves, because this video actually kind of puts movements, it puts music and movements to this, and it really helps you remember the cranial nerves and what they do better. Okay, there's our divisions of our nervous system again. We've already looked at the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. We have looked at the cranial nerves and talked about the spinal nerves. We've talked about the somatic nervous system a little bit. The last thing we're going to talk about is the autonomic nervous system. Remember, the autonomic nervous system is the other division of the peripheral nervous system besides the somatic. The autonomic nervous system is, again, remember, the involuntary division. It is the division that conducts impulses to our involuntary muscles like cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, as well as our glands. The motor neurons in this autonomic nervous system are going to be responsible for helping to regulate our heart rate. Again, that's cardiac muscle, the smooth muscle in our digestive organs, as well as regulating the secretion of glands, such as salivary glands in your mouth, the pancreas, which is a gland, for example. Again, remember, the autonomic nervous system, as we've already said previously, is divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Also, part of that, there's another division that's not on that graphic organizer called the enteric nervous system. Again, we're not going to talk about that a lot. We're going to focus on the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So, the sympathetic neurons release the hormones adrenaline, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, and these hormones are going to travel throughout our body and have widespread effects and help to control us in times of stress or distress. We call this the fight or flight response. I know you've heard that before. So, what are some of the responses of our body in response to the sympathetic nervous system, those neurons releasing these hormones like adrenaline and epinephrine? Well, you guys know some of these already. Adrenaline can give you increased muscle strength. You've heard of people that were in a car accident and someone was trapped under the car, and that their adrenaline gave them so much strength temporarily they were able to lift up that car to get the person out from under it. You guys, that has actually happened because this person was stressed, they were distressed, there was a car accident, someone was dying, someone was trapped under a car, and so their body goes into this fight or flight mode, and that increased muscle strength, guys, it helps them to have increased strength to help them in times of danger or distress. If we think about a deer, a hunter is after a deer. Well, increased muscle strength is going to help that deer to run to get away from the danger. Another thing these hormones cause is an increased heart rate and blood pressure. Why do we need our heart rate to increase? Well, if we're in a time of distress, okay, maybe you're a deer, you're running away from the hunter, your muscles need more oxygen so that they can produce more energy so that those muscles can run away. And so you need increased heart rate because that's going to deliver more oxygen to the skeletal muscle, to the muscles, so that you can run away from the danger. The pupils dilate. Why would we need our pupils to dilate if we're a deer running away from a hunter? Well, if you're a deer running away from a hunter, you've got to see to get away. So your pupils dilate to let more light in so you can see better to run away from that danger. Again, these are on the basic survival mechanisms. That's why I'm looking at a deer running away from a hunter. But again, you guys, even though maybe you're just stressed over the test that you had last week or the test that you're having tomorrow or something, you still have these same effects happen to your body. All right. Inhibiting digestion. Okay, that means slowing down digestion. When you're a deer running away from a hunter, you're not worried about stopping and eating. You're not worried about going to the bathroom. You're worried about running away. You're worried about getting the heck out of Dodge. So these hormones help to inhibit our digestive system because we need to spend our energy running away from the danger. Our skeletal muscles contracting, running us away from the danger, not worrying about digesting our food. In addition to inhibiting digestion, it's also going to inhibit other glands and organs associated with our digestive tract. It's going to inhibit the production of saliva and mucus. We don't need that because we're not going to be worrying about digesting or eating. We're going to be worrying about getting the heck out of Dodge. We're going to inhibit our livers and our gallbladder. Again, because we don't need those, we're going to be inhibiting all of the digestive processes because we're not worried about digesting food. We're worried about getting away from the danger. Also, our urinary system, our kidneys are going to be inhibited. Again, we're not worried about going to the bathroom. We're not worried about making urine. We're worried about getting away from the danger. Stimulating sweating. Again, if you're going to be running, your skeletal muscles are going to be contracting, generating lots of heat. You have to cool down. You have to keep your body temperature under control so that you don't have a heat stroke and die while you're trying to get away from the danger. So we're going to stimulate sweating. We're going to have piloerection. That means the hair stands on end. Again, the hair standing on end, again, that is just one of your responses of fear or when you're in danger or stressed. The lungs are going to dilate. This means that they're going to open up and get bigger. Our breathing rate is going to increase. Again, why? Why do we need our lungs to dilate and our breathing rate to increase? Well, again, we are going to be running. Our skeletal muscles are going to be contracting. That means they're going to need lots of oxygen so that they can produce energy for contraction. So we're going to breathe faster so that we can take in more oxygen, which will go into our blood, will be delivered more quickly by that increased heart rate to our skeletal muscle cells, so that those cells are getting the nutrients and the oxygen that they need to produce the energy that they need to contract to get the deer away from danger. And then, of course, the increased muscle strength so that you have the strength to run to get away from danger. And again, these are all of these body responses to these hormones that are released by these sympathetic neurons are there as a basic survival mechanism, fight or flight. You're going to fight the danger or you're going to run away from the danger. You're going to fight it or flight. But however, you guys, we have these same responses even if we're just crying because our boyfriend broke up with us or our girlfriend broke up with us, okay? You're still under stress or distress. Do you need all these things to happen to survive your boyfriend or your girlfriend breaking up with you? No, you don't. But when you're in this mode, when you are under stress or distress, you're stressed out, you're nervous, you're anxious, you're scared, or maybe you're even excited. These hormones are going to be released and these body responses are going to happen. And you guys, this is the reason why stress kills people. This is the reason why stress causes so many health problems. And I'm going to have a lot of these problems because I'm under stress all the time, and you guys are too. When you are stressed, it puts your body in this fight or flight mode. These hormones are released and these things happen. Over time, okay, we keep having an increased heart rate. That's hard on our heart. We keep having an increased blood pressure. That's hard on our heart and our blood vessels. We keep having, inhibiting our digestion and our kidneys. Okay, that's not good. That's hard on our digestive and our kidneys to be inhibited all the time. It's not good for our body. Our body's not going to get the nutrients that it needs because we're not going to be digesting food like we should. So, over time, these hormones being released because you're constantly under stress is hard on your body. And after years and years and years of this, it causes a lot of problems in your body and causes your organs to start giving out. So, that's why stress is not good for us. Okay, the parasympathetic nervous system is pretty much just the opposite. Those parasympathetic neurons are going to be releasing the hormone acetylcholine. Acetylcholine promotes the maintenance of your body at rest. So it is responsible for what we call the rest and digest response. You've probably never heard of that one before. But again, when you're at rest, when you're calm, these neurons are releasing acetylcholine that's causing these effects. Again, when you're calm, your heart rate is going to slow down. Again, you're rested. You're not worried. You're not in danger. You're not trying to get away. You're resting. Your heart rate is slower. Your blood pressure is lower. Your pupils constrict. Again, we don't need all that light getting into our eyes because we are, we're at rest. We're not trying to see to get away from danger, so we can constrict our pupils, make our pupils smaller so less light's coming in. We're going to stimulate our digestion, stimulate the production of saliva and mucus, stimulate our liver and our gallbladder. Again, because we're going to stimulate digestion, we're resting. We're not worried about using all of our energy to get the heck out of Dodge. Now we can rest and relax, and we can increase our blood flow to our digestive tract. We can increase the contraction of the smooth muscle in our digestive tract and our glands. We can release our saliva and our mucus so that we can begin digesting our food and getting that food from one portion of the digestive tract to another. We're going to constrict our lungs. Basically, our lungs are going to close up. They're going to get smaller because our breathing rate is going to slow down. Again, we don't need all that extra oxygen to get to our muscles to produce energy for us to be able to get away. So our breathing rate can slow down. Our heart rate can slow down our blood flow, so we can rest and relax. And this will help keep us alive longer. So the more we can be in this, we don't want to be in this mode all the time because then you get fat and lazy. But the more we can be in this mode, rest and digest, the better it is on our body, because our body is more, it's calm and it's laid back and it's just doing its normal thing, taking care of itself, resting our heart and our lungs, giving our digestive organs a chance to digest food so that our body can get the nutrients that we need, that our cells need to survive. Again, you guys, these two, you don't just have one working and not the other. These two work together to maintain homeostasis in your body. When you're excited or nervous, then your sympathetic is gonna hype up, and your parasympathetic is going to go more toward the background. When you're resting and relaxing, the parasympathetic is going to be more in control, and the sympathetic is going to be more in the background. There are some activities that actually require both. For example, having sex actually requires both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems to function. So these guys are not total opposites of one another. They are not working against one another. They work together to keep our body in homeostasis, no matter what kind of experiences that we are working on. Another thing that I like to talk about is just think about yourself at school versus when you get home. When you're at school, you're kind of, guys, in this fight or flight mode, okay? Your friends are around, you're worried about doing something stupid and them laughing at you or making fun of you or giving you a hard time about something. You're worrying about tests, you're worrying about getting to class on time. And so when you're at school or even at work, you are in this fight or flight mode. Your blood pressure is going to be higher. You're going to be breathing faster. Your heart rate's going to be faster. But then when you get off work or school and you come home, what's the first thing you want to do? Probably, maybe not in this order, but one thing you're going to do when you get home, raid the refrigerator and eat something. Second thing you're going to do, go to the bathroom. Maybe not in that order, but very closely in that order. So again, why? Well, our parasympathetic nervous system takes over when we get home. When we get home, we're in our happy place, we're in our calm place, so we can wind down, we can come down. Our heart rate is going to slow down, our breathing is going to slow down, our blood pressure is going to come down, and our digestion is going to kick in. We're going to think, oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I've got to go to the bathroom. And I can tell you this from personal experience. During the day at work, at school, when I'm teaching all day long, I don't think about going to the bathroom. I don't think about eating. Okay, I don't think about being hungry, of course, until it's lunchtime. But pretty much at school, I'm in fight or flight mode. I'm stressed. I'm in a hurry trying to get everything done before the bell rings each period. I'm worried about getting, about dealing with all the students in the halls and in my classroom, making sure they're getting what they need and helping them if they're not. And so I'm in that fight or flight mode. I'm stressed. So I don't think about going to the bathroom. I don't think about eating. I think about surviving and getting through this period and getting through the day. And then as soon as everybody gets on the bus or goes out to the parking lot and gets in their cars and goes home, it hits me and I'm like, man, I've got to go to the bathroom. I haven't been to the bathroom all day, and then I have to go to the bathroom. And then right after that, I'm starved to death. As soon as I get home, I'm getting in the refrigerator and seeing what I can find to eat. So again, when I get calm, when the students are gone and I get calm, then that parasympathetic nervous system takes over and I start thinking, oh, I've got to go to the bathroom. Oh, I'm hungry. During the day, that really doesn't occur to me a lot of times because I'm in that fight or flight mode. I'm stressed. I'm not worried about eating and digesting food. I'm worried about, surviving. I'm in survival mode. Okay, this is also a little, it's not really necessarily a good video, but it's kind of cool and it's kind of funny. If you want to watch that again, I'm not going to play it here in case it's copyrighted, but if you want to go to the PowerPoint, click on this. It's kind of a cool little video. Again, as I said, that these sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, again, both branches of the autonomic nervous system, don't only work during times of stress or relaxation, but they're constantly working together to help your body maintain homeostasis. Okay, the third division of the autonomic nervous system that I said we weren't going to talk a little bit about, we just got a little bit of information here. Basically, it is the enteric nervous system. This is a meshwork of nerve fibers that innervate only your visceral organs, your gastrointestinal organs, your pancreas, and your gallbladder. So it's like your digestive organs have their own little nervous system called the enteric nervous system. It is it includes lots of neurons. It is very complex. And I don't really know exactly even how much we know about it. But one major neurotransmitter that is produced by the neurons in this nervous system is acetylcholine. Again, in general, acetylcholine is excitatory. It stimulates smooth muscle contraction. It stimulates glands to release saliva, mucus, things like that. Again, that's going to aid in digestion of your food. So this is the reason why this enteric nervous system, like our parasympathetic nervous system, releases acetylcholine, because it stimulates the production of saliva and mucus from glands, as well as stimulating the contraction of smooth muscle in our digestive organs, so that it just facilitating the digestion of our food. And you guys, that will be it for the nervous system. I hope you have a great day and a great rest of your week. I hope you have a great rest of the semester. And if you have any questions or need anything, just let me know, and we'll be talking to you later. Bye-bye.